What's up, everybody? Thanks for joining me. I got something kind of exciting I'm going to do here. I'm going to do a couple of videos on two topics that I see and hear a lot, both in the seminars that I do online. I'm pretty active on some bear hunting forums and on the bear hunting stuff on Facebook, and there's a couple questions that come up a lot, and I'm able to answer those questions because of 20 years of experience in the bear hunting business and having hunted bears all across North America. So those questions are this: number one, where do you find the biggest black bears in North America? And number two, where is the best place to go to hunt a color-phased bear? So I'm going to do two videos, one on each of those, and I'm going to start out here with the biggest black bears and give you some information on where the biggest black bears are found in North America. And some of these spots are really going to surprise you. Before I go to the map here, I want to help you understand why do bears get big in some areas and not so much in others. So there are three factors that primarily influence how big bears get in specific areas. Number one is the habitat and availability of quality food. Number two is hunting pressure. And of course, number three is age. You don't have young bears that are really, really big. You have older bears that are really, really big. Now, really big can be expressed in two ways. Obviously, you get your Boone Crockett record books, which records the skull, and you've also got really huge body weights of bears, and those are generally kind of the same areas, but not necessarily. There are some areas I'll talk about here where they get really big skulls, and other areas where they don't produce very many Boone Crockett skulls, but they produce lots of really outsized heavy bears. So we'll get into that. So as far as habitat and hunting pressure, those are two things that are going to greatly influence how old a bear is going to get, and of course how big a bear is going to get. So let's just go through the map of North America here, and let's point out some areas where the biggest bears can be found. And I think you'll be surprised about some of these. I'm just going to start from the East Coast and go west here. So some of the biggest, heaviest bears, the fattest bears, 600-700 pound bears, come from an area that might surprise you, and that is the coastal areas of the Carolinas right here. And the reason for that is twofold primarily. Number one, really good quality food, lots of crops, good soils with lots of good minerals, and kind of average to below average hunting pressure. And then of course the fact that it's mild weather, so the bears will eat year round instead of hibernating. We'll find out that the potential for growing really big bears in parts of Canada is really, really good, except that they're hibernating for 6 months of the year. But this area in coastal Carolina produces a lot of really big bears. Now, people talk about 500-pound bears all the time. In fact, 500-pound bears are really very rare, and 1 in 1,000 really. I've hunted for big, heavy bears and Boone Crockett bears throughout the last 20 years of really seriously hunting black bears. I've only killed one 500-pound bear, and I was out there really trying to kill a big bear. So people talk about 500-pound bears, but actual bears that have been put on a scale and weighed 500 pounds, they're really not very common. So when you start talking about the kind of bears that they produce in this area of Carolina, you're talking about 600, 700, 750 pound bears, which are just ginormous. They don't typically have huge skulls. That area doesn't produce a lot of Boone and Crockett skulls, but it does produce a lot of really heavy bears for that reasons that I just mentioned. Okay, here's another area that might surprise you. The entire state of Pennsylvania produces a lot of really big-headed bears. In fact, a lot of Boone and Crockett, the top end, and if you look at the top 20 Boone and Crockett bears in the record book, I think 9 of them come from Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania is unique in the way that they harvest bears. In fact, they don't harvest very many bears, so the bears have a chance to get older. This is, as I mentioned before, an expression of low hunting pressure. Now, Pennsylvania manages their bears a lot different than most states. There's no baiting allowed. Most of the bears in Pennsylvania are shot by two ways. One of them is just opportunistic, where you got a deer hunter, and the bear tags are cheap, and a lot of deer hunters just put a bear tag in their pocket. If they see a bear when they're deer hunting, they shoot it. Drives are another way that bears are harvested in Pennsylvania. The countryside lends itself fairly well to pushing small pieces of of timber and pushing those bears out. They'll have huge groups of people, 20, 30 people, and they'll do drives and try to shoot bears that way. Well, the bigger bears, the mature males who figure this system out, they're very difficult to kill that way because they just learn how to sneak around and not be susceptible to those drives. And the only other way that a few bears are killed in Pennsylvania is people that hunt over food sources and just sit and wait over acorns or an old apple orchard or something like that. So a lot of bear licenses are sold, but the success rates are very, very low, and so that kind of translates into lower hunting pressure, but they've got high quality food, lots of farm crops and things like that, and that's why Pennsylvania produces a lot of really, really big bears. So most of this area across the United States here does not produce a lot of big bears. Some of these states produce pretty good numbers of bears, but just not big ones. As you go up into Wisconsin, that begins to change. Now, if you look at the top 20 counties in the Boone Crockett record book, 10 of them are in the northern half of Wisconsin. That gives you an idea how many really big old bears are being shot in Wisconsin. And this, once again, translates into a really good quality habitat, number one, and number two, the hunting pressure is not as high in Wisconsin. The bear population is very, very high. Hunting pressure is not as high because the tags are very restrictive. In northeastern Wisconsin, for example, right in this area right here, it would take you 10 to 12 years of applying for a bear tag, getting a preference point every year to draw a tag. So in a way, Wisconsin is managing for trophy bears because these bears have a chance to get older, and they don't have the really super high quality foods like the farm crops and so forth so much up in that area, but they got a lot of acorns and mast crops, hazelnuts and so forth, and they have a chance to get older because the harvest is low, and there's bear baiters in the woods that are feeding them. So that's how these bears get big, and they just genetically have really big heads, and so there's a lot of big Boone Crockett bears come out of Wisconsin, the northern half of Wisconsin, definitely more than any other state. So right next door is Minnesota. It's a neighboring state with really similar habitat. The hunting pressure is heavier because Minnesota has more managed over the last 20 to 30 years. They've managed for an opportunity rather than a trophy situation like Wisconsin. They give out a lot more bear tags. Used to be a few years ago, you could draw a bear tag about every other year in most of the zones. Now, most of the zones are 3-4 years. Some of them are up to 6 or 7. Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia. Let's talk about that as far as producing big bears. In the southern half of each of these provinces, basically, have really good high black bear populations, and you'll find the bigger bears where the northern boreal forest meets and fades into the farmland, and that's where you find some of the biggest bears. And here's the thing with these areas, they have a lot of outfitters. So there's a fair amount of hunting pressure, even though there's huge numbers of bears, way more, each of these has way more bears than any of the most in the United States. Of course, they're bigger in land mass area too, but if there's a road, there's an outfitter that's hunting that area, most likely. They produce some big bears, they produce some Boone Crockett bears, they produce some 500-pound bears, and it depends a lot on how the outfitter manages his outfitting territory. And then when you get into the areas where you have to fly in, you get into areas where you have a lot more bigger bears just because they have a chance to get older. And if you have an outfitter that doesn't take as many hunters and so forth, then you're going to have a chance to have a bigger bear. So there are Boone Crocketts, more so in Manitoba and Saskatchewan, Alberta than in Ontario, but those bears typically, 400-pound bear is a big bear in most of those areas. Okay, here's a couple other surprises for you. Some of the biggest bears in the United States come from eastern Arizona, specifically Gila County, Arizona. Believe it or not, Gila County, Arizona has produced 46 Boone Crockett bears, which is, I think, third overall in the for one county in the Boone and Crockett record books. So they don't produce a lot of bears, but they tend to produce really big bears. And part of that is the fact that it's warm weather. The living is easy. They got pretty decent high protein food, and they get the carbohydrates they need, and they can eat all year round. So Mendocino County, California is kind of the same situation. Northern California produces quite a few Boone and Crockett bears, and I'm sorry this thing's got a lot of glare to it, but that's an area also. Okay, there's one more area that produces a lot of really big bears, and one of them is an island off the coast of southeastern Alaska that has produced more Boone and Crockett bears than anywhere else in the world, and that is Prince of Wales Island off the south, right there, southeast Alaska. And that has produced 116 Boone and Crockett bears the last time I checked, which was I think the most recent Boone and Crockett record book I'm going off of here is about 6 years old. Okay, another area for really good bears is Kuyu Island and Vancouver Island. Those are the islands off the coast of British Columbia that produce quite a few Boone and Crockett bears, and also 400 to 500 pound bears. The hunting pressure is not really heavy there. There's some outfitters operating in the area. There's locals that also go out and shoot bears. But once again, there is a lot of high quality food there along the seashores and so forth. And the bears that live along the shore rather than up on the mountaintops have an opportunity to feed for the majority of the year. So that's a pretty good rundown of where the biggest bears are found in the United States, both the biggest bodied bears and the most Boone and Crockett bears. I hope that's helpful to you. I'm going to do another video here on where to find the color-phased bears. So I appreciate your comments. If you want to leave a comment below, hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. There's lots more good videos coming on hunting bears and deer and so forth. So thanks for being a part of this, and we'll see you next week for the color phase video.